A lot can change in 25 years. It's unlikely you had a mobile phone or an internet connection in your house back then, unless you were fairly flush. And instead of trawling Netflix, you picked out a videotape to watch on a TV that would take two fully grown men to move. And the brand new Ferrari F355 we'd have been filming would have had just about half the power of its modern day equivalent. Yep, we don't know we're born these days, but whilst none of us would ditch our precious phones or instant access to any movie you could possibly think of, cars can be a different story. Supercars now are objectively better in every way than they've ever been. They're faster, more capable, more usable and comfortable, and even safer if you get things a little wrong. But you'll still hear people say they don't make them like they used to. The F355 is a prime example. It was the last of what you might call the old school Ferraris before the 360 came along, and thanks to a generous SCD member, we're about to take a trip back to the 90s to find out what all the fuss is about. Launched in 1994, the 355 was actually a massive overhaul of the fairly unloved 348. It's named after its relatively tiny 3.5 litre V8 with 5 valves per cylinder, and it revs to over 8,000 RPM. It has 375 brake horsepower all the way up near redline, and that's up from less than 300 in the 348, so that was a massive gain at the time. It also gained power steering to make it easier to live with, and a 6-speed manual instead of a 5-speed. Now, a few years into production, the 355 was actually the first road car to be offered with an F1 paddle shift gearbox. I think 20 odd years ago that was crazy tech, and at the time it must have been fairly appealing to have, I've got an F1 gearbox, Formula 1 gearbox in my car. But really, they weren't very good. And if you have one of these, you want it to have one of these, don't you? This is a GTS model, so it bridges the gap between the full coupe Berlinetta and the full convertible Spider. So you just get a removable targa top, which I've left in today because it is deceptively freezing out there. But thanks to a level 2 Capristo exhaust, which I'm sure you've heard by now. Oh, even with the top on, man, it sounds amazing. I don't think many of these cars have the stock exhaust on anymore, and God, when you listen to that, it is not hard to see why. I think a lot of people have a bit of a soft spot for these, myself included. It's a bit before my time when it comes to driving, but when I was a young kid, this was the Ferrari at the time, and it has that classic Ferrari wedge styling, the pop-up headlights. It was the last mid-engine V8 Ferrari with pop-up headlights, and who doesn't love pop-up headlights? I'd say if anything inside it feels older than its time. It's very sparse in here, but everything's covered in leather. It's a comfortable place to be, apart from that classic Italian driving position, which you can probably see. It means that even with my short legs, my knees are up here beside the steering wheel. The steering wheel doesn't move, so my arms are sort of stretched out, and going around a bend, it's sort of trying not to hit your knees. That's part of the character, isn't it? But if you forget about the fairly strange seating position, it is a wonderfully engaging thing to drive. To be honest with you, I haven't really pushed it yet because it just doesn't feel like that's what it's about. I'm sure back in the day, I mean, it was the latest and greatest Ferrari. It was about going fast. But these days, obviously, there are way faster cars. It isn't exactly a slouch. I mean, obviously, with nearly 400 horsepower, under 1,400 kilos, it's not going to be slow, is it? All the power's at the top end being such a highly strung engine. God, with that exhaust note, it is worth winding out all the way. Got such a long throttle travel for these days as well, so it's pretty easy to modulate how much you want. Apart from on the way out of corners, it's a little bit stiff at the top, so that initial bit of power can be a bit jerky. And of course with the gearbox, even if you are just cruising along, you've got something to do. It's just something so nice about an open gate shifter. One thing that has surprised me is the brakes. For a car of 20 odd years ago, they're more than a match for the power. And they just feel nice as well. They're not too grabby at the top, but the pedal's nice and firm. Another cool bit of tech for the time, as well as the F1 gearbox it was offered with, this actually comes with electronically controllable dampers. There's a little switch down here to change between sort of comfort and sport modes. Now comfort's fine for these roads, but again though, 20 odd years ago, that was really trick. Now steering, threading this thing through a bend. It's a revelation after a modern car. Obviously it doesn't dart in anything like an F8 would, or even a 430 to be honest. You have to turn the wheel a lot more. I know you think journos talk a load of nonsense about steering feel, and sometimes I'd agree, but in this, it's true. You can just feel the wheel like wriggling around in your hands with every little detail underneath you. One thing which probably helps how the steering feels as well is this lovely Momo steering wheel. I mean, for a start, it looks so much better than that big, ugly airbag one you got from factory. But it's small, it's Alcantara, it just feels great in your hands. It does mean you can't see how fast you're going, and you can't see the revs beyond 3,000 either, but small price to pay. It's just cool after you drive something modern with electric power steering where you can't really feel anything. The whole point of it is just to turn in as fast as possible. Yeah, you have to turn the wheel a lot in this. To go around a 90-degree bend, you're probably fully crossed up. It is quite a slow ride by modern standards, but it means you're just so involved in driving the thing. And that's the whole point. And another point with that is you've got no traction control, no stability control. You blip your own downshifts. It's all on you, really. Feels like a really special thing. Porsche are faster cars now. In fact, my missus made the point of making fun of me driving this because her M140i would smoke it in a straight line, and having driven it, yeah, it would absolutely destroy it in a straight line. But that's sort of missing the point of this car, isn't it? It's not the sort of car you thrash from point to point. You just enjoy it. You go as fast or as slow as you want to. You use the gearbox like a musical instrument. So rather than getting to the end of the road, being out of breath, your heart racing, thinking, oh my god, how am I still alive? And you all know I love feeling like that. It's great. I love cars like that. But in this, it's different. You get to the end of the road and you're just smiling. You think, that was nice. And as everything really gets a little bit too fast for the road, there's something to be said for that. Despite the F355's cult following, I wasn't actually expecting too much from it. After all, it's over 25 years old now and the game's moved on. But I ended up really enjoying my time with it, and it makes you realise so many ways in which modern cars forget the driver because they're just so fixated on being faster than the other guy. It feels small, so it's wieldy on British country roads. Visibility is great because there's so much glass and no big chunky pillars. It's easy and comfortable to drive slow, and even rides well. Admittedly, the build quality would never pass these days, but it doesn't feel as fragile as I thought it might when you press on. Importantly, all the controls feel perfectly weighted, even if the driving position isn't ideal. When you're driving it, it doesn't feel like it wants to be hurried like its period rival, the Porsche 993, but it's engaging at any speed. So, do those people have a point who say they don't make them like they used to? Well, if we're talking about going fast from point to point and having a car push you into your seat, no. But if we're talking about pure driving enjoyment without any electronics or filters getting in the way, absolutely.